And I remember going into the room where Srila Prabhupada was, and he didn't have a shirt on at the time. He had just taken his bath and was putting on tilak. And when he saw us, he was very, very happy, and I offered my dandavats. And Gargamuni Maharaj introduced me to Srila Prabhupada. He said, oh, he has given up going to medical school to become a devotee. And he found out that we had just come from East Bengal, where a war was going on. And Srila Prabhupada was very, very grateful. He said that you have risked your life for me and for Lord Chaitanya. And he was so grateful. And he asked me, so you like our books? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, which book do you like the best? And I said, the Bhagavad-gita, as it is. And he said, oh, very good. And as time went by, I went out of the room. And Srila Prabhupada said to Gargamuni Maharaj, after meeting me for the first time, he said, I will make that boy a sannyasi. I was 21 years old. For Mahaprabhu's appearance day, I wrote one poem on surrender to Lord Chaitanya. And I gave it to his servant to put on Srila Prabhupada's desk for Mahaprabhu's appearance day. But I didn't sign it. And Srila Prabhupada, I guess, had read it and liked it very, very much. And by process of elimination, he was asking everyone who had written this poem. And by process of elimination, it arrived to me. So he asked me, he called me into the room, and I was sitting with him there alone. And he was very, very sweet and very kind. And he said, so you have written a poem? And I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, oh, that's very good. To be poetic is one of the qualities of a Vaishnava. And he said, get a piece of paper and a pencil. And he had written to me a poem. Actually, it was prose, which he entitled 6 Verses on Surrender. And I wrote them down, one after another. And they were very much along the line of Rupa Goswami's teachings. And I still have them, which I have on our altar at home. And during that meeting with Srila Prabhupada, I had the opportunity to speak with him personally and alone. And I could reveal some of the things that were on my mind and in my heart. And I said to Srila Prabhupada, as I had mentioned earlier, that Krishna had revealed himself to me. And that's why I've come to you. And he said, now you must tell them that God is not dead. And then I said to Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, you're the only person I trust in this world. And Srila Prabhupada looked up at me very kindly and he said, don't trust me. I will let you down. Trust Krishna. He will never let you down. I asked Srila Prabhupada for initiation. And he did the fire sacrifice. And there was Tushta Krishna and myself. And Tushta Krishna actually had come from Hawaii and was with Siddha Swarup at the time. And some of his followers had come to take initiation from Srila Prabhupada. And the fire sacrifice, after being done by Prabhupada, he gave us our names. And he named Tushta Krishna. He said, one who is satisfied with Krishna. And he gave me my name, and he said, Pusta Krishna, you are Pusta Krishna. Pusta means strength, one who gets strength from Krishna. And he was really amused, I think, by the names, Tushta Krishna and Pusta Krishna. And the next morning on the morning walk, he was very jubilant. And he looked at me and he said, Pushta Krishna. And I said to Srila Prabhupada, thank you for giving me a name. And then he became very grave. So I understood at that time that Srila Prabhupada could be a little bit unpredictable, and that one had to be grave in his presence, and I always tried to be. There was one occasion when we were flying from Singapore to Australia, and Hari Suri was his personal servant at the time. They were seated up in the first class section, and I was seated in the back in the coach section. And the plane must have hit an air pocket or something, and it seemed to drop very, very quickly, maybe 5 or 10,000 feet, it seemed like. My stomach was in my head, that's all I could think of. And it was like going down a roller coaster, but it was a huge roller coaster because it just continued for about 5 or 10 seconds. And I remember getting up, and I was pretty shaken, although I was chanting at the time. And walking up to Srila Prabhupada in the front cabin and asking him if he was all right. And he looked like nothing had happened at all. And I asked Srila Prabhupada, "Are you okay?" And Srila Prabhupada said, "Yes, we can die at any time." So we were flying from Mauritius to Durban, and it was a Qantas airline that was coming from Perth, Australia, and there was some type of a rugby match that had taken place with the South African and New Zealand teams at that time, and there were a lot of rugby types on the plane, and we had a seat in the non-smoking section, and I was seated beside Srila Prabhupada, and there I was with my little British hat and shirt and coat and pants, and people were smoking in the non-smoking section, and of course I was disturbed by it because I didn't like it, but I was also concerned for Srila Prabhupada's welfare, and so I asked one of the stewardesses, could you please ask them to not smoke? This is the no smoking section. So she informed the rugby type guys who were drinking quite a bit as well to stop smoking, and of course they didn't stop smoking. So I again went to inform the stewardess, can you please ask them again? And Prabhupada stopped me. He said, "What is the difference between us and them if we can't tolerate these sort of things?" He said, "Don't be an ordinary, common, foolish man." Buddhimanta especially, rest his soul, was going out onto the streets, and of course he was a very imposing figure. He was very tall and big and bright-faced. He appeared somewhat crazed, I would say. But he was distributing incense, and he was begging for money, really, in a way that we had never done before. But he was collecting a lot of money to help bring this dream about. And I had some differences of opinion about how the money should be collected. Who was I? I mean, I was just really traveling through. But I made it known to some of the devotees that I thought maybe a monk shouldn't act like that. And it was really a bone of contention between Bali Mardana and myself at the time. Of course, we've reconciled that since then. But he called up Srila Prabhupada and talked to Shyam Sundar and objected to my objecting to the way that they were collecting money. And Srila Prabhupada wrote a very instructive letter back. And he didn't criticize either of us. He didn't say, you're right and you're wrong. Either way, that wasn't his concern at all. He simply said, I just want that you should all be able to get along together. And I think that's very instructive, because we had different ideas about how devotional service should be carried out. And Prabhupada wasn't about to take sides. He rather wanted us to simply work together harmoniously. And It's something that's taken me a long time to understand, but I think that it tells something of his character, that he was more concerned about us working as a family than he was about crediting someone as being right or wrong. There was an instance in South Africa where, again, I was his acting secretary at the time. The fifth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam had just been printed, and the first copies were sent by air express to him in Johannesburg. And Bhargava had been traveling with Srila Prabhupada, taking pictures of the programs that Srila Prabhupada was putting on. And it was the night of a very big program in Pretoria. And Srila Prabhupada had received this box of books, and in fact there are some photographs you'll see of Srila Prabhupada sitting in a room looking at the fifth canto, and there's orange and white tile on the floor. That was the house that we had converted into a temple in Johannesburg. Srila Prabhupada opened up the books and was looking at them, and he was so happy to see the fifth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam printed, and he was relishing it. And Bhargava was doing his job. He was taking picture after picture after picture, snap, snap, snap. From a distance, he wasn't getting in Srila Prabhupada's way. But Srila Prabhupada said, in a very angry way, "Why are you always taking so many pictures?" And Bhargava Prabhu was very saddened and sheepish about the comment. How can I say this? He felt very bad, as if he had been chastised by Srila Prabhupada. He walked out of the room, and Bhargava walked out of the temple. And we had a program that night. And after Srila Prabhupada had said that, Bhargava had gone, and he's in Johannesburg, South Africa. And all Prabhupada could think about is, where's Bhargava? Where is Bhargava? Why has he done this? He was so concerned about him. It was such a sweet thing that was going on. Bhargava, of course, I've told him about this later, but he doesn't realize how concerned Srila Prabhupada was about him. And we went to the program, Bhargava wasn't there. And then after the program, all Prabhupada could talk about was Bhargava. In the car, where is Bhargava? Why has he done this? And I said, Srila Prabhupada will go out looking for him. And it was about midnight. And we got a call. And it was Bhargava. And he felt so terrible that he had angered Srila Prabhupada by taking so many pictures. And I said, stay right where you are. I'll go pick you up. Srila Prabhupada wants to see you in the worst way. So we went and picked up Srila Prabhupada. So we went and picked up Bhargava Prabhu and brought him to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada, like a loving father, had such a beautiful interaction with Bhargava. He said, I don't want you to feel like this. I just don't want you to always take pictures of me. Why always me taking pictures? Here are the books. And I think it showed the character that Srila Prabhupada had of what he really wanted. He didn't want a cult made out of him, that people should always take pictures of him. Of course, he's a spiritual master, but he's really the most humble servant of the Lord. He's playing the role of spiritual master only because of necessity to serve his spiritual master. But in reality, the only thing that he wanted was to magnify Krishna for everybody. Later in one letter that I had received from Srila Prabhupada, I had informed him that I was going to get married. He gave me his blessings. And he said, but above all, continue to follow the four regulative principles and chant 16 rounds of Hare Krishna mantra every day. That will protect you. And he said, My only request is that you don't become an ordinary, common, foolish man. He wasn't concerned that one was a sannyasi or a grihasta. And he frankly said in the letter that these things, of course, even by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, are considered external. But that he was concerned about, that we didn't become common, foolish men, but remained very high-minded and Vaishnavas. In Europe, I spent a lot of time initially preaching in Paris, and Srila Prabhupada was invited to come to Paris, and then we went on to Geneva, where we were starting a preaching program. And Guru Garanga had arranged for a hall to have some program. And I remember Bhagavan was there, and we were sitting on the stage after having had a kirtan with this very so-called sophisticated Swiss audience. And one person got up and asked the question, why are you vegetarians? And at that time, Srila Prabhupada's reply was, why don't you eat your sister? And when I heard that, I looked at Bhagavan, and Bhagavan went like this. Like, oh no, how are we going to get out of this one? And then Prabhupada went on to explain, why can't you discriminate? And what he was saying, I think, was very extreme, of course. But what he was saying is that human life, and eating included, involves discrimination. And while he took an extreme position, it was very instructive, at least to the devotees, although some of the devotees didn't know how to take it at the time. But Srila Prabhupada could do that. He could sometimes be very shocking to make a point. And one thing is very sure, that we could never really predict how Srila Prabhupada was going to answer a question. And sometimes he would answer the same question differently because of the circumstances. And we'll never understand how or why, but we can appreciate Srila Prabhupada's character. During Prabhupada's lecture, he basically stressed what he also stressed to me in a letter shortly after I took sannyas, which was to study the philosophy. He was very concerned that we understand the philosophy very thoroughly. And he said to me, do just like I'm doing. Just like sometimes I'm managing, sometimes I'm preaching, sometimes I'm cooking, sometimes cleaning, like that. Whatever needs to be done, that's sannyas. And it was very instructive because he was teaching yukta vairagya, that real renunciation is to do whatever is required for the service of Krishna, and not to maintain a false posture of being very aloof, as if one is only a preacher. I did get into the massage loop. I remember when I was a fresh sannyasi in 1972, and it was the time of Janmashtami and Srila Prabhupada's appearance day in New Vrindavan in 1972. It was, I believe, August. And I think his personal servant was unable to massage him that day. So he said, Pusta Krishna, you can give him a massage. I had never massaged anybody. I said, so how do you do it? He said, well, you start on the head with sandalwood oil, and then you do the body with, from head down, with mustard oil. So we sat outside where Srila Prabhupada was staying in New Vrindavan, and I went behind Srila Prabhupada and offered my obeisances, and took some sandalwood oil in my hand, and started to very gently massage his head. I didn't know what I was doing. And Srila Prabhupada said, what is this? I said, well, Srila Prabhupada, I'm trying to give you a massage. He said, massage means hard, like that. So I figured it out that, you're supposed to massage hard, so I started rubbing his head real hard. And he's very pleased. And so I was rubbing the head with sandalwood oil. And it's hard to imagine massaging Srila Prabhupada for the first time without knowing what you're doing. And then worked on his back with the mustard seed oil and whatnot. And actually it was a very sweet experience to be able to massage Srila Prabhupada, because apart from rendering the personal service, Srila Prabhupada would sometimes talk about Krishna conscious things or business related to Krishna consciousness. And he would sometimes be amused by the way that we would massage. You would continue massaging until he said, go to the next part. We would massage his back and his arms. And I remember someone had told me that Srila Prabhupada liked his toes cracked. So I used to, massage Srila Prabhupada's toes very hard, trying to crack his toes. Prabhupada sometimes he used to laugh. He said, "Oh, that's enough," like that. It was really kind of humorous. He was really a very kind-hearted person, and those times are very sweet. There was one time we were driving from Durban to Pietermaritzburg in South Africa, and we're out in the country, and there were some big, long, white buildings some distance from the highway. And Srila Prabhupada asked, "What are those buildings?" And I responded that they're a chicken coop that belongs to a large chicken farm that they use as a slaughterhouse. And Srila Prabhupada said, "Why do they bother? Let them make a chicken. You take some egg, you put some liquid in it, you incubate it, and let them make a chicken." But they can't, those rascals, because they don't understand that the life is not in the egg, but it's the spirit soul. And he carried on for some time talking about that. It was a really very animated time. Of course, Vishnujan Maharaj was a very dear devotee. He was a great friend to many of those who were introduced to Krishna consciousness by his beautiful kirtans and the traveling sankirtan parties that they had had. And his kirtans were angelic. They were heart-piercing. They were beautiful. And it was a morning walk in Mayapur when I remember as we were completing the walk and we were perhaps a quarter of a mile away from the main temple building, headed back, Vishnujan Maharaj approached Srila Prabhupada and he said, "If someone falls down from the sannyas position, do they have to do what Chota Haridas did in order to keep Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy?" Prabhupada said yes. And there was some concern that no one could really commit suicide over such an issue. And Vishnujan Maharaj, following that meeting, he disappeared shortly after taking bath in the Ganges that day, and was never seen again. There's a funny story that took place in New Zealand. And of course, Srila Prabhupada, his patience could also be taxed. New Zealand was a beautiful country, of course, for Srila Prabhupada to visit, and devotees there were very mellow, very sweet. And there were a lot of families that had small children. And after the lecture one day, Srila Prabhupada asked, "Are there any questions?" And so, one after another, these fathers and mothers would bring their children up and say, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada, please give a name to my child." And so he gave one name and then another name, and it would go on. And finally, um, someone asked Srila Prabhupada, please give a name to my daughter. And he said, Rose. And I think his patience had been tested at that point. With regard to Srila Prabhupada meeting his godbrothers, it was in, I think, March or April of 1976, when Srila Prabhupada asked me to travel across to Navadvip to pick up Srila Sridhar Maharaj, to bring him over to meet with Srila Prabhupada at the mandir in Mayapur. It was a very glorious time. There were so many devotees there for the festival. And we had just purchased, actually, from the South Africa Yatra, one Mercedes for Srila Prabhupada. And we had driven it across overland. And at that time, Srila Prabhupada had asked me also to stay on as his secretary at the Mayapur festival. So we drove over to Navadvip. It was a long drive, and went to the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat. And I remember going upstairs, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj was sitting there. A very old gentleman, a little bit older than Srila Prabhupada. He was chanting japa, and I offered my respects and obeisances and invited him into the car. And we took him over to meet Srila Prabhupada. And we brought him upstairs to Srila Prabhupada's room, and he and Srila Prabhupada were very, very close. There was no doubt about it. They were very, very dear friends. And they offered their obeisances to each other, and it was clear that they had a very special relationship. In Australia, it had, as Srila Prabhupada's secretary, come to my attention through some rumors in the temple that there were some ISKCON devotees who were really displeased with the success that Siddha Srupananda Maharaj had had preaching in Hawaii, and how the followers that he had gathered were not all coming over to Srila Prabhupada, so to speak. And of course, Siddha Srupananda Maharaj was using Srila Prabhupada's books, and chanting the holy name was a key focus for his work. And of course, the details I'll leave out because they involve people that there's no need to mention in this context. But when I mentioned it to Srila Prabhupada in private, Srila Prabhupada raised his eyebrows and said, that is Vaishnava Aparad, meaning it is Vaishnava Aparad against Siddha Srupananda Maharaj. And he qualified it by saying that there are many branches of the tree of Mahaprabhu. And Prabhupada said this with all humility, that ISKCON is not the only branch of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's tree, and that we need to develop a tolerance for other branches of Mahaprabhu that may develop both then and in the future. Je anilo prema dana karuna prachu